Welcome to Our Next Existence by Katie and the Chorus. I'm Katie, former technology strategist turned reluctant spiritual medium, and I channel messages from the Chorus, a group of beings just beyond our sensory perceptions who are loving, expansive, and who greatly enjoy sharing their perspective of us. Join us each week as we share and discuss their ideas about humanity's existence, purpose, and future. Concepts you can draw from to accelerate your path, expand your perceptions, and ultimately step into the flow of the universe and your life. Welcome back, everyone. In some of the live sessions lately, and for those who don't know, we have started doing live Q&As that are open to all of our listeners and supporters. Our live events are listed at katieandthechorus.com/live. And that's where you'll see the next date. They tend to be on Tuesday mornings, but sometimes we also get interviewed at other places that are open to the public too, and I'll list them there as well. But in some of our live sessions lately, there's been a recurring question about how did you know? How did you know that it wasn't like your inner voice and it was actually like these separate beings that became the chorus? I would say in the beginning, I didn't have names for them and I didn't know what was happening. But over time, actually not too long of a time, I gave them that name, not understanding yet how appropriately it fit the variety of voices that I was connecting with. So in this episode, I talk about some early experiences I had with the chorus when I used to go walking and channeling. And it'll be explained in this episode. But I went back and I pulled out some of them and I started listening to them again. And I'd like to play some of it for you now while also sort of giving you a commentary on what it was like. And I think this might help for those of you who are just starting out, maybe wondering about these things or feeling these things, to see sort of more of the process that I went through with the chorus. Okay, and the audio quality on these is not awesome, but we'll see what we can do. Okay, so this recording comes from 2017. I was early in my channeling of the chorus, and as I describe in this episode, there was a trail near my house that I used to like to go and walk on because various reasons that I'll describe in the episode. And so this recording starts when I'm actually still in the car, and listen to the chorus coach me on why my mind is in overdrive and how that's affecting. This is where we spent many of our early conversations, was that as I opened to connecting with them, my mind would just accelerate, like nonstop churning. And this is part of the balancing effect of the belief systems, which they're going to start to talk about in this walk. So listen to how it starts before I even started walking. You are tired because mind has been on overdrive. You are still a little bit betwixt and between. You are still acclimating. There is some lumpiness to the process because the contrast of the lumps highlights for you the forward direction. Now, this is a theme that we know well from the first book from the chorus and the podcast season so far, is that the difference that we often feel between thinking and energy highlights for us the direction that we're heading in. And this is what they're already pointing out to me. But it's brutal, right? I'm like exhausted as I get to this trailhead. I dragged myself there. So then they say, shall we walk? And my reaction is, just a heavy sigh of just like, this is so freaking hard. Fine, I'll walk. So now watch over the next several minutes as I am channeling. I am connected, but I don't trust it yet at this juncture in time. It takes me a while to acclimate, basically meaning to trust it. We believe your recording device is working just fine. We know this feels strange, another new experience. But your instinct was right again, and you were able to detect it even in the midst of mind confusion. be all right. See how when you focus on your words, when you focus on what we are saying, you withdraw a little bit from physical surroundings. It's a different sensation than you are used to. Your mind freaks out a little bit, we might say. Mind wants to know that you are safe. Now, this is an aspect that I've since forgot about, just how much my beliefs of protection would activate simply by opening to this weird channeling connection, right? It's kind of weird, it's kind of risky and unknown. Morning. Now, as you can see, minutes are still passing where I am grappling with these fears of being a crazy person. So now, let us talk again. We know you're acclimating. It takes a little time. This is new. You have never channeled an interdimensional being while you have walked on a trail before. Is it weird? Is it weird? It is new for humans at this time. But in actuality, not that strange. Only strange based on where you've been. Hi. So nowadays, if you attend a live session with us, I can basically close my eyes and I'm connected to them, and their understanding can come through. That didn't happen overnight. I had to acclimate to a lot of aspects of being human and connecting in this way before I had sort of like a swinging door for the chorus where they could just pop in anytime and I would hear what they had to say. I could take it in. I could say it on our frequencies. And then, they would leave or I would leave and then come back again. So this speed increases the more we give ourselves the freedom to feel out these things imperfectly. I have dozens of recordings that say not a lot, I'll be honest. I mean, in this particular walk, I don't really get to the meat of what they're trying to express until 20 minutes into the walk. I just re-listened to it. I almost fell asleep because it was so boring up until the 20-minute mark. Boring to me now. Now I feel so familiar with these concepts, with their frequencies, with the way that they look at things, that a lot of this to me is sort of normal, like boring normal. But it wasn't back then. Back then, the work that I was doing was giving myself permission to try out something really unknown and really new. It might be easy to dismiss from my current perspective the first 20 minutes of that walk because of where I am today and how much more meaningful the things that they said in minutes 20 to 24 were. But I am here today because of all those hours and all those times that I spent turning again and again towards an opening to a possibility. That's all you got to do. It's the easiest thing and it's the hardest thing in the whole freaking universe, or at least our universe, in our human universe. Just remain open to the possibility. In the first part of the episode, you'll hear directly from the chorus themselves, and then afterwards we will discuss all the possibilities. It is time, dear ones, that we spoke a little bit more about your experience here and what led you to this moment in your time. This understanding has been coming through to you in many ways, besides in this message. For humanity has been remembering much, questioning much, and looking around in your environment with new eyes, seeing ancient things in new ways. We understand that there may be a preoccupation with the details of these artifacts, but from our vantage point, this is possible by way of the incredible fact that you all are awakening. There is much to see, and you will see all of it because of your ability to reach, to expand into these vaster frequencies. Trust us, the artifacts aren't going anywhere. In fact, they have been there for a very, very long time. But we see and understand and appreciate the urgency with which you would like to resolve the mysteries that they represent. For, from a certain vantage point, you need to understand them, because you believe that in understanding these artifacts, you will begin to better understand yourselves, and you would like to solve things that you think that understanding will assist with. But from another vantage point, perhaps closer to our vantage point, the urgency that you sense, that great longing, that burning desire that causes you to turn time and time again to these questions, and at times the painful sensation of recognizing that you still do not yet have the answers that you seek, is because you are walking through an important part of awakening in which you are becoming conscious of many of your beliefs about time. There is all the time in the universe for these things and many other connections, because you are the ones who create it. Would you not first like to achieve that ease? Would you not first like to feel that sensation of expansiveness? No other pressure, no other ticking clock, no other deadline, nothing. Nothing weighing upon you at all. Just your ability to be in those places, evolving into those understandings for as long as you wish, and as often as you wish. When you are able to move into this kind of present moment presence, you will see more of these things. You will understand more of yourselves and more of the remnants of these prior empires and civilizations that you constructed. It is in the present moment, beloved ones, that you will recognize more of what you are, and that understanding will be amply reflected in all aspects of your environment. It is by ease that these things will show themselves to you. It is by trust that you will be able to understand. We love you infinitely. I find myself saying that lately. I really want to put it on a t-shirt. I have many ideas for things to put on t-shirts. I just never get to them. But I mean, that's kind of it, isn't it? Don't you feel what they're saying? Yeah, present moment presence sounds amazing. Ease, that sense of like you're just here and flowing through it. And trust, which by their definition is releasing our beliefs about time, which drops us into a present moment. When we're thinking and evaluating and worried and planning and preventing and protecting, we're usually all up in our heads. And as we feel a sense of trust of whoever we're with, of whatever's happening, we ease back into the present moment. We become perceptive and attentive and open and curious, as we talked about a couple weeks ago. And I get all that. Truly, I do. They've been talking about it in my ear for a long time. But it doesn't mean that I don't feel the other half of me. I still feel the human aspect, the limited aspect, the belief system aspect that then goes, what the fuck is happening? I mean, okay, it's quieter than it used to be, right? I used to really freak out when all sorts of new energy came through. It was just, wow. The corollary response from my belief system sent me into a mental churning that would last for days. I think most of us understand this with crisis or chaos or new energy. We're not exactly zen. We're thinking. We're thinking through those experiences. It's part of what we did. It's part of how we would get all up into our heads and out of the present moment. And so now that half of me is quieter, but it's still there. And I see it and I allow for it. And you know what? Some days I side with it. When the chorus is like, yeah, this is all happening. It's all unfolding. It's going great. You're doing great. You're seeing all of this. You're awakening to all of this. And sometimes I'm on board with that. I feel it too, and I can trust it. And then sometimes it's just like, what the fuck, you guys? Like, how much longer does this go on? How long is awakening? Let's ask a really important time-based question. How long is this shit going to go on? It's a valid question. It's a valid question because that perspective is valid. It's real. We live it. We embody it. We create it. And so we don't get through it by telling that part of us to be quiet or to just trust. We move through those parts of ourselves by accepting and honoring the questions that those parts of us have. This time I brought another thing out of the suitcase. As I spoke about a few weeks ago, that over the course of my therapy, after a lot of wild years with the chorus and other experiences, I started to take out these experiences that I had packed along the way and finally look at them, finally integrate them. Maybe you've had a few of those opportunities lately yourselves. And by opportunities, I mean, it's just so painful you can't not talk about it anymore. That counts. Sometimes we have a very peaceful recognition that something needs to be allowed to breathe, allowed to be seen, allowed to be heard. And then sometimes it's just been banging down the door so friggin' much that you just can't handle it anymore and you gotta say something out loud. Both are valid processes, though you probably have one you prefer. And I would say that by going through any process, of allowing the things inside of you to be spoken, to be sung, to be written, to be painted, allowing it to come out of you in any way is part of moving in the direction of your preference. It feels more subtle to me now than it used to when something's ready to come out, and I definitely can roll with it more than I could before. I guess you could say I do have a greater trust. I have a greater trust of the stuff that comes out of me, and I have a greater trust of the rewards, of the benefits, of the value of letting stuff out of us. Ultimately, it has always led me to greater healing and to greater heights. Sometimes, especially right before I'm about to take something out of the suitcase, the reasons not to escalate. And it seems like the biggest risk you're ever going to take. And if you can let those be true, could be. But what if it's not? You sort of allow all the perspectives within you about what this could become live in equal proportion. Balancing those proportions can allow us to move forward just a step at a time. And each step that we take forward strengthens our ability to balance multiple perspectives. The more I've gone forward in letting things out of the suitcase, the more I start to recognize little suitcase leaks ahead of time. It starts in my thinking processes. I'll start to have these random thoughts about a particular topic, which at first are so easy to dismiss and forget that I had. But over time, as you let more and more out of the suitcase, as you turn towards more and more of these unique aspects of yourself, they start to become easier to retain, easier to remember. Now, as we've been talking about, according to the chorus, memory is a way of accessing other frequencies. It's a way that we did it from within the confines of the game. So we have an idea of a thing called memory, which is a mental construct of recalling to ourselves events we have already lived through. And this is not invalid. However, another way of looking at it is that by way of this concept of linear time and memory, we have allowed ourselves to reach other frequencies, the reflection of which is often a thing that feels to us as though it is something we already lived. As we continue to go forward, what we may find is that the present moment perception stands out to us more than the five senses reflection of the action or the activity or the place or whatever it is that is a reflection of that energy. We will feel the frequencies that we are reaching, and energetically we will begin to interact with those in other ways, besides just thoughts. Now remember, according to the chorus, from their perspective, thinking or thoughts are the first manifestations on our frequencies. When we are starting to receive something or perceive something, we first often have a thought about it. There are things beyond thoughts, as we know. There are energies and there are capabilities that we have that reach far beyond thinking. However, as was part of the design of our game here, we limited our perception to just that. And as we are starting to remember, there were times in which we didn't even think that much. Present-day humanity doesn't have a lot of concepts for what it was like yet to be in other portions of our history. We have artifacts. We have bits and pieces down in the dirt to tell us more about what that existence might have been like. As we continue to go forward, the memory of other times will express more to us about these things, about these experiences that we had, than looking at old parchment or old fabric or old houses would be able to tell us. There are epochs in our history where we did not think that much. We did not have these constructs in our minds like imagination or memory or mental planning or projections. Now, as we've talked about mental projections in the past, the chorus would suggest that by way of mental projection, we are holding ourselves away from the present moment. And this is true. But remember that in an infinite universe, all things can be looked at from an infinite number of perspectives, including positive or negative. That is to say that there are ways of looking at mental projections that are an expansion over what we previously were capable of doing. From one standpoint, you could say that our ability to plan is a limitation because it pulls us out of the present moment perception of answers and solutions that could manifest right before our eyes in that instant. However, you could also consider planning a step forward into our ability to more fluidly imagine, ideate, and create the possibility of solutions that we would like to move forward towards by way of the plan, that prior to being able to plan, we may not have been able to experience those possibilities in as visceral of a way. It's up to you. Either planning was a step towards our awakening, or planning is still something we are passing through. So sometimes as I'm moving towards a thing that needs to be brought into the light of my consciousness, as the chorus would say, I start to notice first these little thoughts that start cropping up in different places. At first, I didn't notice them, I'll be honest, until I'd gotten very far down the road. And then I would turn around and finally recognize a series of these manifestations from that perspective. But as you continue to do this over and over again, what happens is that the recognition and the manifestations come closer and closer together. So now, as I have maybe a thought here and a thought there, and the next day another thought, by the third, fourth, or fifth thought, my conscious recognition of those things starts to kick in already. And I'll say, isn't that interesting? That keeps coming up. And then I'll start to notice little patterns of action that are unusual or seem to be coming from somewhere else inside of me. Like perhaps when I'm going on a walk, I find myself stopping and staring at something a little longer than I normally would. In my early days with the chorus, when I was channeling them, I used to go on long walks while channeling. Partially to see if I could do it, partially to test if my connection was real, and partially to help myself out. Because I recognized early on that if I somehow got my mind preoccupied, it helped me to open up a little bit more to the messages that were coming through before my brain would start demanding things about where is this going? What's happening? This sounds like utter nonsense. You probably read this in a book last year and forgot. All those amazing beliefs that pull us right out of the present moment. So if I gave my mind a bone, so to speak, if I gave it something to get busy with, that freed up this other part of me to stay connected to that place and bring through those messages a little longer. So I became very fond of walking while channeling because my body's engaged. It's something I could do pretty much on autopilot, and I could look around and see things and do whatever while also speaking out loud what the chorus was saying. This was a delicate balance between picking trails and walking areas that were not heavily crowded because I didn't want to be muttering to myself under my breath, looking like the crazy person walking around the lake. But I also didn't want to be on a trail where I was completely alone. For some reason, that thought terrified me. There was some aspect of me that deeply needed to remain connected to normal life, to other people on our wavelengths. So I sort of stepped into a process of evaluating medium to low busy trails in my area, where I would still pass people occasionally and maybe could still see them ahead of me and behind me. But I wasn't constantly trying to hide the fact that I was actually channeling out loud. One such trail is near my house and kind of walks along a ridge above a farmland area that overlooks the Boulder Valley and the entire Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. It's beautiful. Every season, sunny days, cloudy days, the view is just stunning. There's a little irrigation ditch that runs beside it that sometimes is full of bubbling water and sometimes is empty and sometimes is just mud, and all the dogs love to run down into it and roll around in it. And every so often, interspersing this view, there are these massive, massive trees. Not the pines that are up in the higher elevations, but these old, some sort of oak tree or cottonwood, huge. I mean, trunks so thick, they've got to be 8 feet in diameter. This trail always had everything I was looking for. Not too busy, not too empty. Lots of amazing things to look at to distract me. And of course, beautiful elements of nature like trees and water and fields of farm grasses. I remember one of the times I was walking on this trail and channeling the chorus and having a conversation with them. The topic came up about what I look at. Now, if you listened to last week's episode, you understand that there is a different way of looking at our eyesight, which is that it is a reflection of our limitation, of our beliefs, meaning we don't see a lot of things that are not wholly aligned to our experience of limitation. If it is expansive, we had blinded ourselves to it. Another way of looking at that is that eyesight was a blindfold. Now, early in my conversations with the chorus, I had not yet come to this understanding. I did not yet understand what all of our 5 senses represented. Now, again, as with anything in the infinite universe, you can look at each thing as potentially being more expansive or potentially being limiting. And the chorus always taught me that they are, in fact, both and all things. Eyesight is a valid interpretation of energy. And also, by way of our resonance with beliefs of limitation, there are things that we don't see, or there are things that we see only fractions of or certain perceptions of. So one day as I'm walking along the trail, they sort of bring up this topic. They said, well, what do you think your 5 senses perceptions are? I was sort of at a loss. It's like, what do you mean? I mean, it's the way I perceive the world. And they said, yes, but what do they each represent? And out of that conversation came something that they allude to in the first book, which is sort of that some of our sensory perceptions, like eyesight and hearing, stretch out a little bit further than some of our other sensory perceptions, like touch and taste. Touch and taste are literally the frequencies we are right on top of. But eyesight and hearing are our ways of perceiving energy a little bit beyond the frequencies, particular frequencies that we are currently resonant on. Now, from the perspective of the chorus, they're like, well, it's all just kind of what you're right on top of, right? Because they're very expansive They have a lot of frequencies. They can perceive tons at one time. And so they were like, one way of looking at it is it's kind of all the same bundle of energy. It's just kind of what you're right on top of. However, it is valid to say that from your perspective, eyesight and hearing reach a little further out. So now, as they're saying this, I did not recognize this, but my gait slowed. And I started looking west across the farm fields to the Rocky Mountains. So they're talking and I'm listening. And then at some point they say, do you know why you're looking in that direction? And it was only then that I realized that I was. And I said, why am I looking at the mountains? And they said, yeah. And I said, well, they're beautiful. That's why I'm looking at them. And they said, yes. What kind of energy do you think mountains are? Well, I'd never actually contemplated this, but they are mountain energy. I mean, I had nothing. I had nothing to say back. I said, well, they're beautiful energy. They're mountain energy. I had no names. I had no concepts. I had no words for this. I was truly stumped. So then they pointed out, they said, your mind, your body, your energies are reflecting your growing expansion. And they basically suggested to start watching what I look at. Now, this was a brain bender for me because that suggested that there was a whole other aspect of things that my eyes were drawn to that was not in my conscious control. So even though I had made a choice to be on a trail where my mind would be content and busy and leave me the F alone so I could channel, it had never occurred to me to really monitor, to really observe what and how my eyes look at things throughout the day. And particularly what they were suggesting was when you expand into this energetic place, when you're at ease, when you're reaching for us, when you're feeling out these more expansive energies and not actually thinking and looking at things, what do your eyes do? So this created sort of a bit of a game over the next few months. And it was hard to catch all the time because you really have to be in that sort of picking your head up and looking around the game type of place to recognize what your body is doing, what your eyes or hands or ears or things, anything in the body is doing when you are in that expansive place. And the most interesting observations about eyesight started to come through, which was, first, something that they mentioned in the first book, which was that when I started to think about any bigger sorts of concepts, my eyes would almost always be very naturally drawn to the furthest point in the room or the furthest point looking out the window. And as they mentioned in the first book, this is often why humans, when they are thinking or contemplating a big idea, their eyes will be drawn to the horizon because they are reaching for the furthest frequency that is possible to be perceived. And the way of doing that with eyesight is to look out into the distance as far as you can. It is a natural reflection of our reaching for the most expansive energy is that our eyes look to the furthest place that they can. Now, this was kind of interesting to me because, I'd never really totally noticed the way my eyes moved when I wasn't thinking about my eyes, when I was in some other place. This extrapolated me even further from being immersed in a totally unconscious perspective of my physical body. I began to observe my body in more ways and began to see the connections between where I was at energetically and how my body reflected those things. So then the next observation sort of evolved over time, which was that I noticed often when I was talking to the chorus, if there was a window, if there was a way that I could look at the mountains, I almost always did. So I would be driving home from work and channeling them, and we'd get to a certain point in the conversation that would sort of lead off into new directions. And I would find that as often as I was looking at the road, I was also looking out my side window towards the mountains. It happened from our bedroom window. It happened when I was on walks. And sometimes I didn't even have to be channeling. I have one memory of walking and just feeling so expansive and so at ease, so full of life and vitality. And I came up to a ridge to look at the mountains. And I realized that I had taken a slightly different way back than I normally did, as if reaching for that most expansive thing that I could see, that next frontier. So over time, this became very clear to me that there was a connection between expansive energies and mountains. Now, this is not to say that only mountains are reflective of expansive energies or, that was the only way that I could reflect that. It was not like a one-to-one, but it was a sort of correlation, a sort of, hey, when I hang out on these frequencies, I'm more drawn to these things. Now, at this point, I was still meeting different members of the chorus. And as many of you know from listening to the first season of the podcast and some of the episodes so far this season, I did not spend a lot of time defining the different members of the chorus. I sort of just let them all appear and asked their questions and felt out their differences and then moved on. This was because I was not yet integrating any of those experiences. They were happening in sort of a little energetic pocket of my being, so much so that by connecting to me, they were able to more fully understand our belief systems because I was still wholly and completely connected to them. I was still basically human. So one night, I start to feel a pull, a very, very strong pull, a very strong presence. And sometimes this would happen before I was introduced to a new member of the chorus, as I like to say. It's like, I don't know, you ever feel like someone's about to show up at your front door? The presence just starts to emanate through the room way before anybody knocks or rings the doorbell. It felt like that. Now, at this time, I was still terrified about what was happening to me. I felt very much afraid of anyone finding out that I was doing this. And so I often still hid the channeling, even from my husband. He was kind of aware that I was doing it. He was very uncomfortable with it. I was still sick. I mean, we had so much going on that it was kind of like, who has time to confront this channeling thing? It was just the topic at the bottom of a giant pile of topics. And yet I still felt compelled. I still felt drawn to it. I felt that ultimately every single time I was uplifted by it, despite how hard it was to move in this direction. So this night I felt this, big call, big presence. And I wondered whether or not I could ignore it. Normally I couldn't. It would just keep sort of knocking at the door. So I decided to just go for a long drive to get out of the house. That felt safer to me. It felt less risky. I don't know. It was a way of keeping it hidden and contained and almost less real. As we talked about in the episode on Fringe and where things become real, oftentimes we fall into these patterns or these places where we hold these unusual experiences at arm's length, usually by hiding them from other people and often from ourselves. And in so doing, we prevent them from seeing the light of day and really becoming an integrated part of our realities. None of this channeling stuff was integrated for me, not at all. It was sort of like down the hall in a closet where I would shove all of it and then close the door and then go back to my day-to-day life. So I go down the hall and get in the car, basically, getting ready to throw something else into the closet, and I start to drive. Now, at this point, it was nighttime, so pitch black, stars are out. And I start driving really pretty aimlessly because it doesn't really matter where I'm going. I'm just giving my brain something to do so that I can channel, so that I can bring through this, monster energy. And driving was also another good way that I could put my brain on autopilot. Like, here, you play with this while I have this conversation with this another unknown entity. So as I start driving, I feel very much drawn to driving towards the mountains. I live about 30 or 45 minutes outside of the Rocky Mountains down in the Boulder Valley. And so I can see the whole Front Range from my neighborhood, but it takes me a little while to get into the mountains. And as I drove, I kept contemplating, maybe I'll go north, maybe I'll go south. And then every time I just had to drive west. I had to drive towards the mountains. Now, as I'm driving, I'm well aware that I'm not totally sure what roads I'm taking. I've driven many of them many times before, and I knew I would vaguely know how to just get back to my house. But I wasn't totally certain where I was driving, and in the back of my mind, I knew it didn't really matter. Somehow, I just needed to be closer to the mountains themselves. The specific road, the specific canyon that I would drive up was sort of a detail that wasn't really that material. And each time I turned west towards the mountains, came to another crossroads, could go north, could go south, could go back the way I came and turned west again, I really felt a sort of anxiety and fear climbing. I was very much reaching the edge of my belief systems. This is interesting because how many other times had I driven these roads? How many other times had I gone up into the mountains? And yet this time I felt a whole other presence, a whole other level of something coming through that I had never perceived before when I had driven those roads. So right as I get to kind of the base of the foothills, I really start checking in with the chorus in earnest. I've sort of encouraged myself this far. I've told myself to just trust it. Just keep moving forward. Just keep driving. You're in the car. You're safe. You know how to get there. You know how to get home. And as I reach the foot of the mountains, I reach out for the chorus and I'm sort of like, okay, what is happening? What is this? And they were sort of like, well, there's someone's, however you want to define it, that would like to meet you. And I was sort of like, yeah, I feel that. Not a surprise, course. And, they sort of are like, are you open to it? But at this point, I always was. I don't know how to describe it. Maybe it wasn't healthy. Maybe it was. It was just like, yeah, I know I'm here. I know I'm here. I know they're here. Like, let's do this. So I was afraid and nervous. I guess you could say trepidatious because it was definitely new. But also it felt like coming home. Felt like a thing I needed to know for forever. Felt like someone's I had wanted to meet for a very long time. And so their energy patched through. And it was so vast. I don't know how to put it into words. It was a breadth and an expanse of energy that absolutely dwarfed anything I had ever sensed. They were so loving, but in a very deep, in a very structured kind of way. And by structured, I mean supportive, so strong, so supportive, like a level of grounding where you could just ooze into it. Just that there was no place, no anxiety, no high frequency, agitated energy that I could reach that they couldn't just dwarf by their love and strength and support and grounding. So as I started to climb more and more into the mountains, I was so just bowled over by this energy that all I could say was, "You're so beautiful." I mean, like over and over again, like mumbling like an idiot. As I started to climb into the mountains, all the other traffic, all the other cars sort of faded away. I found myself climbing on these twisting mountain roads, looking at the outlines of the peaks in the moonlight, just in total adoration. And, I can just barely remember what they said. That they are a structure that supports our entire game board. That they are vast and connected to each other across corners of space. And that they have been with us in this experience for a very, very, very long time. You could almost say the whole time. And I was so at ease in their energy. It was as if I was feeling the vastness of the galaxy itself. I could feel their connections to each other. I could feel their support and their strength. I felt safe. And I'll be honest, I don't know what else they said. I don't know what else they communicated to me. But at some point, as I started to come back to our 5 frequencies, I realized that the member of the chorus that I had been introduced to was the mountains themselves. That vast, expansive energy that my eyes kept looking towards were definitely on those frequencies. That they are much, much more than piles of rocks. Much as we discussed in season 1 about our star, they have a consciousness all their own. They can do much. They are much. They move in a way, in an energetic place that we don't yet perceive, but that we will and are starting to. And they have a lot to share with us. And as I started to come back from that place, as they sort of emphasized their love for us all and their joy that I was there and could perceive them and sort of bid me farewell, I realized that somehow my body had been driving the car on curving mountain roads the entire time without any issue and never coming across another car. And as I disconnected from the mountains and I turned around, again, without really thinking about it, and then came fully back into my body, 2 other cars appeared on the road around me, and the radio and everything in the car itself turned on. I'm not sure where I went that night. Kind of freaks me out to say it out loud. Do you know sometimes what freaks me out the most is that I don't want to freak you out. Does that make sense? For so long, I hid so much of this. I put it all down the hallway and in the closet because I was so worried about freaking out my husband, my family, my coworkers, my friends. And now I feel it even still a little bit, that I don't want to tell you what happened that night in the mountains because I really, really, really don't want you to be afraid of the mountains. And I don't even know if you would be. But that's it. That's the fear. That's the part inside of me that says, what the fuck? What was that? Why did it happen? How do you know this is safe? How did you trust that? Why did you? Maybe you shouldn't have. And that's exactly all I heard as I drove back down the mountains and home. I turned off the radio that was blaring, my hands started to shake, and I had no answers for anything that part of me was demanding to know. I tried to think of an excuse as to why I had been out for so long when I got home. I stopped on the way home and got ice cream and came home with the container as proof that I had been doing something normal those 2 hours while I had been driving. Thankfully, my husband had had something come up that night, and so the time flew by for him. That night was actually the beginning of a beautiful friendship. My introduction to the energy of the mountains that night became something that I grew to depend upon. The more my energetic opening continued and the more members of the chorus I met and the more things that started to come through, I found a deep solace in that expansive, steady, rock-solid energy of the mountains. It was a grounding that balanced all the things that I was going through next. And I know this will sound still a little strange to say to some of you, but not to all of you, that the mountains participated in helping write the first book from the chorus. As you read those pages, it is likely that you will become conscious of feeling an expansive, steady support, a grounding, like a hot bath, a warm cup of soup, a baked potato. You will feel a comfort and an embrace. That's them. They've been with us a very long time, supporting, and you could even say upholding, our experience of this game. They are the structure of our worlds and of many other things too. They remember everything. They have not had the experience of forgetting like we do, and they are overjoyed about humanity's awakening and very, very eager to share with us all the aspects of our history that they still hold. So if you find yourself drawn to the majesty of mountains, if you sense something that fills you with awe when you look at them, or even just contemplate the idea of them, know that your energetic perceptions are catching fire. They are majestic. They are so much more than what meets the eye. And if you can feel this, then you are well on your way to even greater heights.
When that sleep won't come and you've cried your sum, let it come to you. There's nothing you can do until I see you smile. just below those eyes that tell me you're okay. It's written on your face. As you come to light, I come alive. Your silhouette in the summer sky. But this is only a measure. It can only get better. It can only get better. And this is only a measure. It can only